Let's look at Python functions. A function in a program is a section of code that's designed to perform a particular action. And on that particular action, it will take an input or a collection of inputs that are called parameters of the function. Then the function typically returns a value for use somewhere else in the program. So there's a function call that involves the name of the function with whatever the inputs are. Then the function performs its task and returns that value. And it then can be called multiple times from different places in the program. In Python, if the function does not specify a return value, then it returns a special value that is an actual value, but the value is none, capital N-O-N-E. The function is named according to the typical Python naming conventions. It can be called when needed in different parts of a program. So if we're only going to do something one time, then we probably don't need a function to do that. There is some overhead associated with calling a function. Resources are needed for that purpose. So if we're only going to do something one time, then we might not specify that as a function. But if we're going to do something 2 or more times, then a function can be used to reduce or eliminate the need to repeat code anywhere. Remember, we do not want to ever repeat code. Repeated code leads to potential errors, either syntax errors or logic errors that can propagate throughout our programs. We want to definitely avoid any copying and pasting, if at all possible, in any scenario. So syntax errors, if we copied and pasted, you made a syntax error in one place, we have to go through and find that in every single place. If there's a logic error, that can be even more difficult to find. If it's been replicated throughout a program, the end results, the logic errors, can compound and be very, very difficult to find if we have copied and pasted code. And even if it's something as simple as changing the output, change the way we want something to be presented, if we had copied and pasted, we have to go through and make that change multiple times. So functions are very useful for condensing things that are going to be repeated in different ways. So we've seen some functions already. We've seen the print function. The print function takes the value of the parameter, which is the argument that we give it. It's put in into the bracket. So we print, if we print a string, then the argument is the string. If we're printing a variable, then the variable name is the argument. We can, with the print function, give multiple arguments, and it will print everything separated with a space. Any kind of thing that can be printed in Python, we can see that with the print function. It doesn't return something that's useful for us. Instead, it just prints whatever we've asked to the screen. To see something interesting about the way Python will print certain things, if you print, then you will see that it tells what print is. It doesn't print the word print because we don't have quotes around it, so it's not a string. We don't have the inverted commas. We don't have a variable named print. We have a function named print. And so it will give us information about that function. Okay, so let's take a look at an example of a function. We're going to create a function that wants to be able to determine whether a given integer is even or odd. So we have a positive integer and we want to know whether it's an even integer or an odd integer. The test for evenness or oddness, this is called the parity of the integer, whether it's even or whether it's odd. And so we're going to create a function that is named parity. So the DEF defines the function. Parity is the name of the function. And the part in brackets here, number, is the parameter, and it will take on a value when we choose to assign a value. So the first line in defining a function is DEF, the name of the function, any parameters, and then there's the colon. Then we have the tabbing, because everything that's part of this block of code has to be tabbed appropriately. So let's check to see, first of all, whether the number is an even number. So if the number is even, we're going to return the word even. So what happens is, if the number is divisible by 2, the code will get to this part, see the return statement, will return even, it will break out of the function, and nothing else will occur inside the function. We will just get back the value even. Otherwise, if the number is not divisible by 2, again, we're not doing any error correction here. So we are assuming that the user has followed the instructions that number is a positive integer. So if it's not divisible by 2, then it must be odd, and we will return odd. Now we could add extra pieces to this function. There are other aspects with error handling, some things about what's called a docstring that will explain what's happening with the function, that we would typically include if we were doing more thorough, maybe kind of production code. So if we write this, then everything that's tabbed over is part of the function. If we print parity 7, that's not part of the function. It's back against the left-hand side, or if we're using idle, we're at a new cursor location. The print parity 7 would then send the argument of 7 to the function. It would check 7. 7 is now the value of number. It checks to see if 7 is even. It's not, so it returns odd. And so we would see, when we print parity 7, we would see odd showing up in that case. Anytime then, anywhere else that you want to call the function, you can call a function from another function. You can call a function from the main part of the program. Some functions actually are recursive and call themselves as part of inside the function. So if we were doing something like calculating a factorial, for instance, we might have a factorial function that calls itself inside the function definition. So you might want to check to see what would happen in this example if you print parity without having anything with parentheses in place. So we don't have the brackets at the end of parity. So in this case, we're asking Python to print the function description. What is this thing? What is parity? Then another situation that often comes up where we make a mistake is we call a function, but we forget to include the argument. We forget what the parameters are, or we forget to include those, and we try to print something. And so check that to see what happens if you print parity with the braces and print parity without the braces, and then print parity with the braces with an actual legitimate argument in place. You can also see what would happen if you put something in there that wasn't a positive integer. So you can see what kind of error handling would actually be needed in order to appropriately create this function. We sometimes use the word methods in Python, that certain functions are associated with particular data types and not with others. So if a function is associated with a particular data type, we call those functions methods. And rather than being the function name and then the parameter in the brackets, methods that are specific to particular data types are called using the dot notation. And so we've seen some of these examples with strings. So if you have a string, we can do string dot capitalize with the brackets. The dot capitalize is a function, but because it is specifically associated with strings, it's a string method, and we call that in a different way. So string dot capitalize with the brackets, then we'll capitalize the first letter of the string. A list dot append. We do the dot append. That's a function again, but again we call it a method, a list method, and that does require an argument to be associated. What are you going to append to the list? So we tell what we're going to append. Capitalize doesn't have a parameter. Capitalize is based on the string you've submitted, and it will capitalize the first character. Pop is another method for lists that again does not require a parameter. We don't need to send an argument. You can, and it will pop that particular index position, that particular value at that index, but pop does work, and the intended version of pop is to take the last item from the list. So it doesn't require a parameter or an argument to be sent when you call the method. So just a brief introduction to functions. As usual, feel free to ask questions in the comments, by email, or on Discord.